Hey guys, I'm in Singapore.
As soon as it was decided that my family and I were vacationing in Singapore this spring, I knew I had to make a video there. Of course, given Singapore's religious makeup, the video needed to be on Eastern religious traditions. I plan on having a script and delivering the lines on location in a kind of vlog style, but I decided against that. I had the perfect opportunity to visit the places these faiths were practiced and learn about them from direct observation. So I thought it best to write my thoughts as I had them on location and then use them as narration later, and wow, I'm really glad I did. In the US, or at least my area of the US, if it's not seen as a demonic force on par with black magic, any non-Abrahamic religion tends to be painted like a caricature, its features exaggerated or minimized according to our cursory exposure to it from considerable distance. A lot of times, Westerners who say they dislike religion really are only referring to Abrahamic faiths.
I don't believe in organized religion, except for Eastern religion, which I am interested in. It's just like deeper.
What irritates me much more, though, is the idea that Eastern religious texts and practices contain a wellspring of profound medical knowledge forbidden in the West. As ridiculous as that is, it's completely understandable why so many Westerners think this way. We don't understand what isn't familiar to us. The overwhelmingly vast majority of us were raised around 3 monotheistic religious traditions and were never educated about anything different. So when we catch a glimpse of one piece of a different faith, we speculate as to what the larger picture must look like. This doesn't always lead us in the wrong direction. It's just prudent to only make judgments based on what we actually know. What a lot of us in the West do understand is the religious tradition and culture we've grown up around. At the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple in Chinatown, I found myself comparing what I observed to what I've seen before in Christian churches. This isn't a perfect way to understand less familiar faiths, as I'm sure some features of one religion are not analogous to those of others. That said, I still think comparison is a powerful tool in coming to understand what is less familiar. Honestly, the similarities between this temple and more Orthodox Christian churches struck me repeatedly. The decadence in their decor was astonishing, but perhaps not more so than the stained glass, statues, artwork, and massive crucifixes I've seen in Catholic churches. Things only got more familiar as a few monks took their posts, flipped open a presumably sacred text, and led dozens of people in chanting its words. This is incredibly similar to responsive Bible reading in Protestant churches and reciting specific prayers in Orthodox traditions. These similarities have likely existed since Christianity became organized, with Buddhism having existed for at least 500 years at that point. Both religions have also changed since then in a few similar ways and by similar means. In looking back on the teachings of Jesus or the Buddha through the lens of what is typically considered Orthodox doctrine today, we often see messages of peace, love, and compassion. However, radical groups have sprouted from the teachings of each at some point in history. In the West, it's easy to cite instances of violence in the name of Christianity. The Crusades in the Middle Ages, Planned Parenthood bombers today, and plenty of heretic execution in between. Buddhism has had its violent numbers as well, though many Westerners don't realize that. While Buddhist violence doesn't seem to have come anywhere close to that of Christian and Islamic crusades, it still exists and is worth acknowledging. Over just the last few decades, militant Buddhist groups in Thailand and Myanmar especially have engaged in violence repeatedly. Some Buddhist leaders have even advocated for the killing of communists and Muslims, saying that this does not violate the precepts of Buddhism. I think this adequately demonstrates that dogma is problematic, no matter where it stems from. If you essentially walk by faith, not by sight, what happens when the doctrinal basis of your faith slowly mutates into something different, something violent? Well, you have the same reason to follow it as before, faith. If you can follow a violent doctrine for the same reason you can follow a doctrine which strictly opposes violence, maybe that reason is a problem. Sprouting some violent factions isn't the only way Eastern and Western religions have adapted similarly over time. I don't know why it surprised me, but the temple I visited had a PA system. The monks chanted into microphones and their voices were amplified by speakers embedded in the temple's massive displays. Of course, I've grown up in churches in which the speaker not only relies on a PA during their sermon, but also delivers it with the accompaniment of PowerPoint slides. In all cases, ancient, pre-scientific teachings delivered with the help of science-based modern technology. Interesting. Likewise, the way the temple interacts with the surrounding community has adapted in similar ways to churches and mosques. There were plenty of donation boxes throughout the temple. There were also small shrines that could be sponsored by members of the community in order to support the temple. Further, the temple invited the community in several times a week for classes on significant religious rituals. All of these are commonplace in Christian churches. Finally, the name of the temple itself is what got me thinking about these similarities in the first place. It's called the Buddha Tooth Relic Temple. In a heavily protected and heavily decorated back room, which I unfortunately couldn't film in, they housed a piece of human jawbone with a few teeth in it. This relic has great spiritual significance to those who visit it. While in that room, I noticed several people bowing down and saying prayers in front of it. Others meditated in its proximity. Now, I'm sure the story behind the relic is extensive and contains elements which are unique, but I just can't help being reminded of the similar devotion many Christians have shown to the Shroud of Turin. In case you're unfamiliar with the Shroud, it's supposedly a garment that covered Jesus' face in his tomb. And although carbon dating has proved it to be a fake constructed in the Middle Ages, it's still housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Italy. It goes to show that the value assigned to artifacts like this often remains fixed, regardless of authentication. So is the Buddha tooth relic real? I thought it looked a little bit too big to be human, actually, but I honestly don't know. But does it really matter? Will its sacred place in the temple be shaken if it isn't? I doubt it. Maybe I'm making an assumption when I think its invalidation would be taken similarly to the Shroud of Turin's, but I don't think it's an unreasonable one to make. So after visiting the temple in Chinatown, I explored Little India and several other places around the city, and a certain line of thought stayed with me throughout. Given all the similarities to Western religion, given the irrationality, the misinformation, the unreliable epistemologies, the oppressive social constructs like the caste system in Hinduism, which I thought about a lot in Little India especially, why don't us atheists or anti-theists in the West get out there and fight Eastern religion the way we fight Western religion? In principle, I'm not personally against it any less. I simply talk about Western faiths more because they affect me and my society more. Plus, I know much more about Western traditions, so I'm just talking about what I know when I criticize Christianity rather than another religion. That being said, if the caste system came into my own backyard and began affecting the way the society around me behaves, if I was given a good deal of experience with it in my own life, I would fight it in the same way I fight Christianity. I'm inclined to think that my fellow atheists and anti-theists would do the same. Nothing motivates like personal experience. Of course, it's also worth mentioning that Western religion has a demonstrably greater influence in, well, the West, so it's only reasonable that those of us so inclined fight the greatest forces for religious oppression we see around us. However, I do think that there are those of us that see Eastern faiths through rose-colored glasses. We see it from afar, and from there we see beautiful artwork, songs, rituals, a rich lore with infinite layers of encoded symbolism, and practices that bring people together. We see the grass being greener on the other side. A faith we're mostly unfamiliar with puts its best foot forward, like most religions try to do, and that's what we see. We don't know its unpleasant secrets. We haven't been there to see it when the novelty wears off. If and when a less familiar Eastern faith comes into our own world, will we continue to see it that way? Should we? Of course, a person is not the religion. We should strive to show compassion and acceptance to all our fellow human beings, and that means upholding their rights to practice things we don't believe in or agree with. However, should we allow novelty rooting from our own ignorance to influence our perspective on cultural issues regarding that religion? I'd say that doing so is ill-advised, and has recent precedent. That's right. Remaining uninformed may lead us to mistakes on the level of ignoring the brutal oppression many women have suffered in order to say that hijab is feminism. For me, this trip was one step toward understanding the unfamiliar, and I hope you'll continue to take the rest of the journey with me. Let's not ignore what we don't want to see, the beauty others see in traditions we're familiar with and despise, the seedy underbelly of those we're only presented the best parts of, and everything in between. Ultimately, We have to understand that nearly every religious tradition is incredibly varied in its practice. That means that religions that seem to encourage extremism may have followers which are entirely peaceful. Meanwhile, religions that seem entirely peaceful on the surface may have skeletons in its closet. This is why when we speak with believers of any kind, it's vital that, for our own benefit, we put assumptions aside and listen. Thanks to my personal sponsors Adam and Rob, and thank you for watching. Subscribe, check out my Patreon, and until next time, stay skeptical.